All right, it's time to begin. This week's video is about evil, a very fun topic, at least when you've got some distance from it, or if you're studying literature. And I do notice that there is a great concern about evil and banishing evil and uh, fending off unfortunate results from your work and people who are out to get you. um, I've already gone over some of the effects of the LBRP, and as you guys know, if you've seen that video, that ritual does seem to intensify paranoia about evil or harm. So I'll start out with a question. Can anyone deliberately hurt you? Can somebody really do that? Because I find it amazing that people don't even question this principle. I'll pretty much, when I walk up to somebody and say, what do we talk about, problems with the world, and I might pose the question, oh, do you think that people really want to hurt you? Like they're talking about terrorism. What do you suppose terrorists want? Do they really want to hurt people? And the assumption usually, or the knee-jerk reaction is, yes, of course. There's something called Schadenfreude, right, which is a German word for deriving pleasure from other people's misfortune. Okay, and so that seems to be possible, or sadism seems to be possible. We have a word for it, don't we? Therefore, it must exist. So we're going to explore this idea of evil because it comes up so much in magic. And it really is a way cool topic, even though ultimately it's an idea that it needs to be transcended, not ignored, though. Okay, just like you wouldn't ignore physical laws, even though physical laws of this physical world aren't really what's happening. They only appear to be happening. But if you're going to be operating within physical parameters, then physical laws, for all intents and purposes, do exist. Okay, so there's a way of looking at good and evil that really goes ultimately beyond it. And the ultimate truth is that evil is not real. Neither is good in that context. All right, so the most basic concept of good and evil is good boy. Good boy. Oh, you're so good. Oh, you rolled over one, and now I'm going to give you a treat. So if a pet is well behaved, you call the pet a good boy or good girl. I have ferrets who are house trained for the most part, and so when I'm training them, if I have a new ferret, if it's a baby ferret, then you really have to put a lot of effort into house training them because they're not natural at it, really, like cats are. But you can train them to be house trained, and they can be pretty consistent about it. and when they obey, it's like, oh, good girl. I have two girls right now. Good girl, and give them a treat or something like that. And if they break the rules, oh, bad girl. I don't do that though. Kind of pandering to them, right? I tend to reward. I don't tend to punish the ferrets. Other than I will put them in their pen if they've done something disruptive. So that's the idea of good and evil as just being obedient or disobedient, and that's at the level of a child. Many adults don't seem to get beyond that level of good and evil. And that tends to be, or it used to be, what was considered conservative, where pretty much everything was about, you must obey and respect God, and that's all you need to do. Obey the 10 Commandments, and if you break the 10 Commandments, then you must be punished. good boy, good girl, bad girl. And then along comes critical thinking. So the kids go off to college, and then the parents get super alarmed because this whole idea of being obedient is no longer enough. The child has grown up and basically now begins to adopt ethical relativism. Uh-oh. So in other words, what's good in one culture might not be good in another culture. Or even more annoyingly, well, what's good for you is not necessarily good for me. And then, of course, the woke ideology comes into that. And, if it's real enough for you, then it's real enough for me. That kind of relativistic thinking, even in terms of existence of things or reality. Oh, if you believe that, then it's real for you. That's the sort of relativistic mindset. And what happens when is ethical relativism important? Of course it is. It's extremely important. And it's quite shocking to learn about it, especially if you're taking an anthropology class, because you just can't believe what other cultures have done throughout history or are currently doing in regard to their moral code of ethics and good behavior. It can be quite shocking. But then what happens is the student beginner college student tends to adopt the view that all ethics are relative. So morality is simply a relativistic phenomenon, and what's good for you might not be good for me. And then we are also sort of free to make our own systems of morality. And so that causes a lot of problems naturally, because apparently morality is not entirely relativistic. It just has a relativistic dimension to it. All right, and so eventually when students develop more refined critical thinking skills, they will look at all the various systems of morality out there, and the next level usually is they adopt one. They choose one, and then they stick to it, or try it out. And this can be very annoying, especially for parents of college students, because last week you were this, and now last week you were vegetarian, and now what are you doing? Like they're trying out all these moralistic systems. Yes, vegetarianism tends to be moralistic, not necessarily based on nutrition or health science. Yeah, and of course the two get tangled up with each other, and the assumption being that if I eat healthy food, or if I eat if I eat food that where murder of animals isn't involved, then I'm not a murderer, and that's also nutritious for me. That is actually quite absurd logically. Okay, so anyway, so to get back into good and evil here, eventually the student goes beyond ethical relativism and then sort of picks a system of ethics, something he or she stands for. This used to be a very big deal, actually, in college systems, and each individual would choose a motto, a set of or a set of principles that he or she would abide by, or they would even join this or that society which had a code of ethics that they would maintain for each other and with each other and personally. Okay, and this is something that is echoed in the Golden Dawn, where each student of magic comes up with a motto. Yeah, and then he or she is known as Frater or Soror so-and-so. Okay, and usually the motto is a saying, let's say, sic luceat lux, which is in Latin for thus let the light shine, and that would be SLL. And if somebody adopted that motto, they would be referred to as Frater SLL, soul. So that's why you've probably seen some very strange Golden Dawn names. This was written by freighter so-and-so or shore so-and-so, and with some strange initials like that. I think DDFC or DDCF or something like that was McGregor Mather's motto. So we move beyond ethical relativism, and then we'll pick a system of integrity, okay, to stick to. And that's usually as high as people go in critical thinking, as far as ethics and things like that. But that's not all. There's other things to consider here. Now, what about evil atmospheres? So I went to that house. You know, that house where a murder was committed. Something was really creepy about that place. So is it really possible to have an evil atmosphere? When I was in my 20s and I began going clubbing, like out to dance clubs and bars and stuff like that, I was very naive about it. But of course I was pretty much an ethical relativist at the time for the most part, and didn't really believe in evil. And then lo and behold, I was already doing the grade work and for the Golden Dawn, and I was shocked to sense the atmosphere of some of these nightclub environments. And it wasn't really about the place, as far as I could tell. It was more about the people who happened to be there right then. But this whole set of behaviors that goes around this sort of clubbing lifestyle with the drugs and the trying to extract pleasure out of this or that situation, sort of mindlessly seeking entertainment at other people's expense sometimes. It was astonishing to me because people would actually take on lurid, demonic behaviors and facial expressions, lolling tongues and things like that. And I was just like, this stuff is real. All the stuff you see that, like if you're watching The Exorcist, a lot of the gestures and the facial expressions and the language that the demon or one of the demons speaks is pretty much an echo of the lewd behavior that exists in real, like, nightclub environments. Is there such a thing as an evil atmosphere? Sort of. But evil is a much more, versatile, tenuous thing going on. Okay, but now the question is it really like a thing? Is it like a dimension? Can it permeate a space and sort of infect it or something like that? So let's talk about the evil dimension. So in Kabbalah, in the Sefer Yetzirah, they pretty much that text acknowledges that the universe is multidimensional. And as you guys probably know, in physics, Einsteinian physics, there are at least 4 dimensions. And so the first 0 dimensions is a point. In other words, like in the neophyte meditation, a single geometric point. And then 1 dimension is a line. Okay, all it is length, no width, no depth, just length. And then, of course, the two dimension, as you know, is like a flat sheet of paper or like a plane. 2 dimensions. And then 3 dimensions is like a cube or a sphere, any 3-dimensional object then, right? And the interesting thing is that, all you really need is 3 dimensions for something to exist, right? No, you need more than that. You need more dimensions than that. Because in order to notice something exists, it takes a little bit of time to say, oh, there it is. Okay, so there's another dimension. And the way you can look at this is, it's a very basic example. If I want to meet you somewhere downtown, I might meet you at the corner of 5th and Elm Street. 5th Avenue and Elm Street, let's say, right? And so those are basically two dimensions already right there. So on the plane of the city, on the plane layout of the city, I'm going to meet you at these coordinates. Okay, so that's we've just done 2 dimensions of coordinates right there. But then I might say, well, I'm going to meet you on the corner of 5th and Elm, but on the 3rd floor of the building there. So that's also got an elevation to it. So that's the 3rd dimension. Okay, so I'm going to meet you at the corner of 5th and Elm on the 3rd floor. So meeting you at that elevation on the 3rd floor is another coordinate that I've had to add to that, and that adds a 3rd dimension. But the 3 dimensions is not enough, because when are we going to meet? Okay, so not only is there a dimension in length and width and height, but there's also a dimension of when, before, after, during. So there's a dimension of time. That is the 4th dimension, according to Einstein. Okay, and so this here is a tarot spread. Okay, this is the Celtic Cross tarot spread. And I'm not going to go into the details of it, but the really cool thing is that the Celtic Cross tarot spread can be used to anticipate or to predict the future, to look at the past and the future and the present moment. It's really mostly about the present moment, but it's got coordinates for also the future and the past in it. Okay, so cards number 1 and 2 are pretty much establishing that the 3 dimensions. Okay, this is where you are right now. This is what's happening right now, just 3 dimensions. But then there's the dimension of the past and the future, and those are cards 5 and 6. 5 is normally the past, 6 is then the future. 6 represents the future. So that represents the 4th dimension of your current situation, the past and the future. And suddenly we have, oh my goodness, what is this? Number 3 and number 4, cards number 3 and number 4. What are those? That's the 5th dimension. That's the dimension of providence. This is also a Kabbalistic concept, but it's not unique to Kabbalah. It's even mentioned in quantum physics, as far as I can tell. The dimension of providence is it's not hard to understand, because you pretty much have a future that's coming and a past that has already been. Okay, if you're going to think linearly about it, do lines actually exist? No, but if we're going to think about time as a line, okay, so we got the future up ahead of you and then the past behind you. Okay, now the vertical dimension in the tarot spread is the 5th dimension. And that is the element of choice, because I don't need to pick the path that's straight ahead into that future destiny. I can tilt it, I can pivot it, I can turn my path and go somewhere else. So the 5th dimension is not only the dimension of providence, but it's also the dimension of good and evil. Okay, you've got a dimension of width and length, you've got a dimension of height and depth, you've got a dimension of past and future, and you also have a dimension of good choices and bad choices, good and evil. The 5th dimension, according to Kabbalah, is a moral dimension. So it's a dimension of not left and right, not past and future, but a dimension of other possible futures, some of them good, some of them evil. And you can actually kind of look at this like you have the 2 angels. One of them on the right shoulder is the good angel, and the one on the left shoulder is the bad angel. These are the steering apparatus. So you can steer towards a bad future with the left shoulder, or you can steer towards a right future with the right shoulder. Well, anyway, those are very crude, configurations, but they all kind of try and get at this sort of dimensional component of destiny and beingness and actions and free will, or at least the appearance of free will. So there is apparently a moral dimension. Now, in quantum physics, they would say, well, it's more like a dimension of choice. And each time you make a choice, you create an alternate universe. And there's one universe where you made the other choice, and that proceeds in this direction. And then and there's a universe that you are in that you kind of went for. That's the one you're in. So every time you make a choice, another universe is created. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting idea. What about the dimension of consciousness, awareness? Some people would say that is the sixth dimension, a dimension of light and darkness, or awareness and oblivion. It's very in vogue to simply refer to evil as unconsciousness. So if somebody, especially if you're a Buddhist, who everything's about awareness or mindfulness, and there's a lot of value to that, but it does tend to dismiss a lot of the flavors of good and evil and of the moral dimension by just saying it's a matter of being aware or unaware. It's not quite, it doesn't quite catch it, okay? But being aware is very important when it comes to the moral dimension, as far as, we can talk about that. As far as demons are concerned. And there is the kind of good and evil of authenticity or integrity. So there's all kinds of different good and evil. And so you might meet somebody who's operating under a different morality or a different kind of consciousness around good and evil. Okay, many people think of good and evil simply in terms of honesty and dishonesty. Okay, or some people think of good and evil simply in terms of obedience and disobedience. Okay, and for most of us, a higher kind of morality is authenticity and integrity, which really was what that college student was opting for. They kind of choose their own code of ethics, and then of course, if they can stick to it, that's sort of authenticity, okay? But there's a bit of a trap there too, because there's another system of morality they can fall into and get stuck in And so what we have here, this is the Tree of Life, Kabbalah, and there's authenticity and integrity. Shouldn't be any surprise that that's in Tifareth. Tifareth, in the center of the Tree of Life, is the Sphera of beauty. And in order for something to have beauty, it's balanced and it holds together. Kind of has a hold together kind of property to it. It's all unified and naturally wholesome, naturally holy maybe, and so it has that integrity to it. In other words, if something has integrity, it means it holds together, like structural integrity. Or authenticity, it is true to itself. That's, when people try to, or when people pretend to have authenticity, they'll say, I know who I am. And, they'll adopt some identity and say, that's who I am, and I'm going to stick to that, So authenticity is more about, at the Tifareth level, is more about knowing what you're not. Knowing I'm not any of these things, but all I know is that I've chosen to sort of operate in this mode a lot. Okay, but I also know I'm not that either. Okay, so, but I know what my propensities are. I know what my preferences are as me as an individual. Okay, and then if I am true to that, then I have authenticity and integrity, and often that's very well respected. But many people are not at that level, and and you can get in a lot of trouble for being authentic or having integrity. And of course, you can be a pain in the ass too if you point out to when people are not authentic or when they're corrupt. In other words, when they lack integrity. Not a good idea to do that. So, so if you choose a code of behavior and you kind of stick to it, cling to it, then you can end up in this in Geburah, which is the honor and duty. These are all virtues of the Sfiroth. Honor and duty that's the sphere of Mars, naturally. And then on the other side of that, the sphere of Jupiter, where you have generosity, another virtue. And that's the benevolent king who always sees the best in you, okay, and generously rewards you, that kind of thing. Uh, yeah, great to have at a party, that kind of person. Yeah, authenticity and integrity is kind of like between those two. Okay. And then you have this sort of lower down kinds of morality. It's simple honesty, in other words, truthfulness versus dishonesty. Okay. So some people think that's evil is simply a matter of lying all the time. And as you can tell, it's, it's more to it than that. And then in the talk, we have the sphere of affection, expressing love, caring for each other, the expressing of caring, hugging, And then below that, this is where a lot of people are in their morality. A lot of people really operate within the realm of self-care and family values. And so they know they'll tell you that they know what they stand for, but they really are just habitually sort of maintaining their family. In fact, maintaining their family at the expense of others. Or maintaining their only helping their friends. It's kind of natural to be that way too. Self-care and family values are very important. It's very healthy for us to stick to those we know and care for them, because if we try to help everybody, we are depleted. Okay, so it's very important to have this sort of selfish sort of morality where I'm just looking after the people that are close to me. That's actually quite important because, yeah, if you try to fix the world, then you're gonna be all over the place, and you're gonna run out of energy. You're gonna deplete yourself. But to be stuck in the level of self-care, obviously there's problems with that. There's chauvinism, tribalism, family feuds, selfishness, hedonism. Okay, and then down at the bottom there, that's important too. Having discernment in Kabbalah, in Hermetic Kabbalah, the primary virtue ascribed to Malkuth, the bottom sphere there, is discrimination. But I didn't want to use that word because discrimination over the past few decades has taken on a very negative connotation. But we can say discernment, the ability to discern, to have good judgment, okay, or to have good taste, sophistication. Okay, and so yeah, it's actually quite important to have good taste, to surround yourself with quality objects, healthy food, comfortable furniture, aesthetic good looks, and things like that. And you can tell, like, if you get stuck in that sphere, there's that can be a problem too. It's sort of like that real estate agent who walks around the house and adheres to the surfaces and caresses things and says, "You want this, don't you?" It's all about the property, and yeah. But that kind of sophistication and discernment is also a good type of good and evil, good taste and bad taste. Okay, so there's all different like virtues and vices that you can adopt. Now, so for many people think of good and evil in terms of benefit and harm. So if something bad happens, it's evil, and if something good happens, it's good. Alas, that these evil days should be mine. So, and in fact, when you learn fortune-telling systems and divination, like geomancy and the tarot, many of the old-fashioned interpretations of various cards and geomantic figures that's a very evil figure, very unfortunate. Yeah, and even like the planet Saturn is the great malefic, the great evil one. And when in fact Saturn is not evil, it just has a character that can bring misfortune with it. That doesn't mean it's evil necessarily. All right, so if evil is not a matter of good results and bad results, is there a hermetic type of good and evil, or a system of good and evil that you can adopt as an occultist or as a magician? Why, yes, there is. And it primarily involves the great work. So the great work is the fantasy of you moving from your sort of imperfect fallen state to a more exalted divine state. And as you would probably guess, I don't necessarily believe in that. It's simply a matter of the great work. The great work is really more a matter of you recognizing the exalted state that's already there. The problem is you don't see it. Okay, and so in that sense, no transformation really happens in the great work. Let's say if you're doing an alchemical transformation, I'm transforming myself into gold. I'm becoming an adept, I'm becoming a saint. I'm becoming angelic or godlike. Well, no, you're not. You already are. But there are things going on that are preventing you from realizing that and experiencing it. So in a hermetic sense, anything that's preventing you from recognizing your inherent divinity can then be regarded as evil. Yes. And that would mean that, yes, unconsciousness is then a type of evil in a hermetic sense, okay, or ignorance. So anything that is sort of hindering you, but you have to remember that there could be aspects of ignorance and aspects of unconsciousness that could help you, here and there, maybe. So they're not necessarily evil in a hermetic sense. Okay, so anything that is helping you recognize your inherent divinity would be considered good, and anything that is beguiling you into not seeing your inherent divinity could be considered evil. What you might notice then is that once you become permanently enlightened, you literally do then transcend good and evil, because nothing can hinder that realization anymore. Okay, and that's not so hard to understand, because if you have an unconscious behavior that kind of takes you over now and again, it's like, I don't know what came over me, I'm so sorry. Eventually, as that tendency comes up, you become aware of how it feels as it's rising. It's like, there it is again. And then it can't take you over anymore. Okay, so, and when that happens, that tendency is no longer evil. It simply is. It's simply something that was trying to do something. It's like, I see you again. And rather than say, you're evil and I banish thee to hell, it's more like, oh, I see what you're up to. And I understand why you are automatically stepping forward to try to take care of this for me. That's not always the appropriate thing to do in this situation, but I appreciate you coming up to share. Okay. And so that's the idea that's basically a demon that has come up and basically tried to possess you and make you do something to defend yourself, or to go out and get something compulsively. And when you notice that thing coming up, you say, oh, you know what? I don't really need to do that right now, but thank you for sharing. And that demon no longer is evil anymore. It becomes a friend. And when it crops up and you could benefit from its energy, then you can use that energy. Can it take you over anymore? Not really, but it's still there. Okay. That's why I say sometimes these demons, they dissolve completely, because you simply don't need them at all anymore. Or they simply become, subroutine programs that continue to run. But as when they're triggered, you can say, oops, no, don't need that right now. Okay, that's what it means to be enlightened as a human being, because we're all riddled with little subroutine programs that keep popping up and trying to do things. But if you are permanently awakened, none of those programs can really take you over anymore. They'll crop up and say, "Do you need me?" And you're like, "Well, I could use some of that energy, but no, I don't need you to take me over. Nothing can take you over anymore." All right. Anyway, but in the meantime, when you're not enlightened yet, anything that is sort of keeping you from recognizing your inherent divinity or enlightenment could be considered evil, and anything that helps you would then be considered good. Okay, this can be very painful, by the way. So if you're taking up the great work and you are seeking enlightenment and you're using these sort of tantric or magical practices to do it, you begin to become aware of the hermetic dimension of good and evil. The reason it's so painful is because the person you're with, your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, might be a hindrance. They might be keeping you from realizing your potential, your divine potential, or your divine, nature, and they become a hindrance. And guess what? By the time you recognize that, there's nothing you can do about it. It's too late. You've already seen it. Okay. Either they're going to have to change, which they will not do. Don't hold out the hope. Well, there's this smidgen of a possibility, but really, I know he can change. He can change. I know he can change. No. So it can be very painful because you begin to notice again and again that this person is a hindrance. There's a jealousy. They kind of sense what you're doing, that you're moving to a different level, and they become a nag, or they try to guilt you into staying the way you were. It can be a very painful experience to have to let people go. People come and go in your life, and that's kind of part of the Hermetic path. Other people will come into your life, but they might disappear as well too as you move beyond their, type of morality or their code of ethics or whatever. Yeah, so it can be. It is a solitary path for the most part, but it's a path in which you get to meet all kinds of different people. And can you keep a friend for a long time? Of course, it's possible. But I'm just pointing out that the most painful aspect of moving to a different level of morality is that suddenly there are people in your life that you will have to move away from. And they can be, most painfully, they can be a spouse. They can be a boss. They can be coworkers. They can be family. With me, it's family. Yeah, I don't associate with family. Nothing's wrong with any of them really, but they're very unconscious. So they have opted to stay that way apparently, or that's how it's turned out. So yeah, I don't have relations with my family. Not that I didn't try. Like with my mother, I basically said, I really just want to be your friend. And she said, yeah, I can be, yeah, let's be friends. And it was pretty cool. We had some really heart-to-heart conversations with each other sometimes, but she would always tend to drift back into being a mom and then, guilting you into, why don't you call me? And things like that. It's like, I'm not functioning that way anymore. I'm sorry. And it's not to say that you're going to let go of that behavior if you develop further in the great work, but it's a warning that it could happen. And that there are types of helping influences for your enlightenment practices, and there are hindrances. And there's a reason why in Kabbalah there's a whole class of demons called the hinderers. No, where are the hinderers anyway? Probably in Saturn, I imagine. Probably in the sphere of Saturn. Yeah. All right, Hermetic good and evil. So, yes. There's also psychopathy, sociopathy, and narcissism. I'm spelling narcissism with a capital N because it's named after Narcissus. Yeah, and I'm very fussy about proper nouns and proper adjectives. So this is an element of evil that we didn't have clinical words for until maybe 1970 or so. And so, but people have been exploring these ideas, especially psychopathy, for uh, 1,000 or so years, really. Let me see. If you think of Edgar Allan Poe, he wrote several short stories where he really explored in depth the character of a psychopath. The Telltale Heart is probably the most interesting one. Also, The Cask of Amontillado and The Black Hat is another one, um, where he explores psychopathy. It's where the actual horror, like for the Cask of the Amontillado, the actual horror of that story is not to be the victim who's killed; it's actually to be the killer. If you look at that closely, because you can't believe it, like you're joking, right? You're just going to do that with no feeling at all, except a vengeance. That's all you feel, So psychopathy is a lack of empathy, essentially, so that the ability to imagine how somebody else feels is simply not there, or it's stunted to a great deal. Okay, and a person who's a psychopath does not have a full spectrum of emotions. Apparently, this is a very real thing. Some people say it might even be up to 5% of the um, population who are psychopath or psychopathic, and they were born that way. They were born without the full spectrum of emotions, and they are particularly lacking in empathy. Um, all these three conditions here are the three types of antisocial personality disorder. Uh, I would say the worst one probably is psychopathy, because there's no cure for that. The brain simply will not process empathy or emotions. They're one of the big lessons about dealing with psychopaths and narcissists is that they cannot change. They will not change. And if you think the themes in literature tend to explore that, really, if you notice, this was actually a theme in literature before they had the word psychopathy. And one of the main things we learn, like pretty much in all of the James Bond novels and short stories, it's about how to deal with psychopaths, because all of the James Bond villains are psychopaths. The James Bond himself is not a very interesting character. It's pretty flat, actually. But the villains tend to be really bizarre caricatures, different types of psychopathy. And yeah, if you think about it, there's lots of very interesting characters in movies and literature who are psychopaths. Hannibal Lecter, very interesting psychopath. But they're all characterized by the same thing. And Aleister Crowley was very likely had narcissistic personality disorder. It's pretty clear to me. I've scanned through his writings to find any trace or hint of empathy for anything or anyone. And he comes close sometimes, but he only gives it lip service. He talks about love, and usually turns it into sexual love. It's usually the love aspect of the work becomes more hedonistic, and you can tell. And the way he treated people he was quite a toxic person, and he apparently couldn't never not be that way. It was narcissistic tendencies, and that really stood against him in the great work, because in the great work, at least in the Kabbalistic scheme, it's important to receive the initiation of Tifareth, or that center sphere on the tree of life. And if you don't have empathy, it's not really possible to be initiated into that sphere. And people who have narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathy or even sociopathy, they do sort of know something's wrong with them, but they tend to be in denial, and they try to exert a lot of energy to prove that everybody's just like them. So in other words, those feelings you have for other people, you're just faking it. You're just pretending to do that, like I do. And I'll prove it to you. And they'll try to, set up little scenarios where they see, look, I see, you're just pretending to care about them. So and it's hard for us to understand that they really don't have those feelings. It's bizarre, and we keep expecting they can change. I know they can change, but they can't. This is one type of evil, okay, and it simply involves not having empathy or care for others. It's simply not being able to do that, and it does sort of apparently create a sort of private hell for these people, though they don't quite realize it, how hellish it is for them. Some of them do, I think. But the impression is that they're living in their head all the time. I'm so tired of living in my head all the time. Like, all I can do is calculate and think about how to try to get ahead and how to be on top and how to be superior to everybody. But they can tell something's wrong because it's not satisfying. Yeah, they can pretend, but it's always, there's always something wrong. So that's another type of evil, unfortunately, that exists. Sociopathy, there apparently is hope for that. So sociopaths are apparently created. They're not born that way. They are abused into being sociopaths. Not much hope for that either. It's hard to rehabilitate one, but at least a sociopath wasn't born with suppressed empathy. It was kind of conditioned into them. At least that's the way it's usually described. I know many psychologists sort of verge all over the place the way they describe things. All right, that's a very important type of evil. Can someone deliberately try to hurt you? So there's an old Zen story about a guy who he buys a boat, and it's kind of beat up. It's an old boat, but he fixes it up. He really he sands it down. He repaints it. It's gorgeous. He loves it, and so he takes it out on a lake one morning when it's all foggy, and the water's like glass. He's just coasting along on the lake, and it's very serene. He's having a great time. Doesn't even have to. He just kind of stirs the water occasionally with the oars, but he'd be just kind of coasting across the water. And then suddenly, out of the fog, another boat comes. Bam! Sideswipes him. Puts a nasty gash in the side of his boat, too. And he's like, what the hell? Why don't you watch where you're going? You're a reckless driver, or reckless rower, right? And he's like really prepared to like give this person hell for damaging his boat. But then he looks in the boat, and the fog sort of clears away. There's nobody in it. The boat was simply adrift. And either he ran into it or it ran into him. He can't quite tell anymore what actually happened. And once he realizes there's nobody in that boat, his demeanor completely changes. He's like, oh, it's like nobody to blame. Okay. So he rows the boat back to shore, sands it down again, fills in the gash, and repaints it. Good as new. No problem. So the first reaction was that there was somebody in that other boat. That person is evil or stupid or ignorant or blah, 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 right? So assigning some kind of motive to that person. You deliberately did that, or you're just so dumb, that there's something wrong with you that made you do that. And then when there's nobody there, it's like, oh, it's just stuff happening. There really isn't any evil there at all. I'm still frustrated because I loved my boat and now I have to fix it. But of course, there's no universe out to get me anymore, is there? And so the lesson in that is that whenever you, whether there's a person in the boat or not, it's still empty. Because if the boat doesn't have anybody in it, it was simply a bunch of forces that were already in motion that led up to that unfortunate incident of the collision. Nobody was trying to do that. There was no motive or intention. This kind of damages the whole premise behind the criminal justice system, because they try to prove motive, right? That's fine. But is there really any true motive there? And so if somebody appears to be deliberately hurting you and deriving pleasure from it, what's really happening? There are a bunch of forces that are in motion that are leading to that unfortunate situation. And if you really look, if you empathize with what it's like to be somebody who is deriving pleasure, supposedly, from hurting you, they're not really deriving pleasure from hurting you. It looks that way, but it's more like there's an insecurity there. It's like, I really don't feel good about myself, but when I put this person down or victimize them, I feel like I have some power now. Now I feel better. So these are really just forces that are kind of in momentum already. They're trying to work themselves out. There isn't any deliberate intention to hurt anybody, even though that person who's hurting you might believe that I'm deriving pleasure from hurting you. That's not what's happening. They're just trying to feel better about something. Look at that closely. So when somebody cuts you off in traffic, um, and it might have even looked like they're driving aggressively. They saw you, but they're like being aggressive, right? It's like, but yeah, is that really about you? Are they really trying to hurt you? Or is it just stuff going on with them that's working itself out? These are forces that are already in motion that are playing themselves out. Okay, it's kind of important to proceed that way, so that this is why enlightened beings don't get offended. They're notorious for not getting offended by anything, because they know that nothing's really trying to hurt them, even when it appears that way. Yeah, maybe really hard to swallow too, because many people build up their entire sense of self based on who's out to get them, who's after them, who their enemies are, who's jealous of them, or who's trying to one up them. And when none of that stuff is really actually happening, then, oh, well, then who am I then? If I don't have these things to strive against or fight against, if there's not a legion of evil demons out there for me to fight, well, then I don't exist, really, do I? There's nothing there's nothing here to defend and to maintain against all those things. Yeah, that's right. All right. So I hope this clarifies the notion of evil, or the problem of evil. Is evil a problem? Well, yeah, of course it is, on a conventional level or on a relativistic level, because people perceive evil as something real, and then suffer because of it. So evil then becomes a problem. But ultimately, no, as we've just explored, it's not really there. Okay, it's just a convenient label we slap on something that is pretty much, oh, that's unfortunate, or that seems to be unfortunate. Okay, but there's nothing really there trying to do anything to hurt you. I guess one more thing to say is that, well, do demons really exist? Well, of course they do, but they're just forces trying to play things out. There are even forces out there that kind of struggle against each other, but that struggling against each other is it's not the true nature of those forces. It's just something about those forces that still is turbulent and eventually going to exhaust itself and disappear eventually. All right. So I probably just made a difficult topic even more difficult, but there you have it. Until next time.